My name is Anna Carter, and the story I'm about to share with you completely changed the way I see life, death, and what comes after. If you'd asked me a few years ago if I believed in near-death experiences or visions of the beyond, I would have shrugged and said something polite yet skeptical. But on an ordinary night, everything changed for me in a way I never expected. It all began on a quiet evening in late November 2023. I remember that day so vividly. It was remarkable in best way. I spent the afternoon with my niece and nephew, Grace and Ben, helping them bake cookies for a school fundraiser. Ben, 8 years old, full of boundless energy, and Grace, at 10, has an old soul wise beyond her years. We laughed so much that day, spilling flour and making a mess in the kitchen. I can still hear their laughter echoing in my mind. It was a perfect moment, one that you wish you could freeze in time. Later that night I was driving home, reliving the joy of the day in my head. It was cold outside, the kind of crisp air that makes you want to curl up by a fireplace. The car heater hummed softly, and a light rain began to patter against the windshield. Everything felt peaceful. I was about 15 minutes from home when I started feeling strange. It's hard to describe, but it was like a deep, oppressive weight on my chest. It wasn't exactly pain, but something ominous. I thought maybe it was just exhaustion, or perhaps even a bit of anxiety creeping in. I tried to ignore it, but the feeling grew stronger. And then suddenly, it hit me, a sharp, cutting pain that made me gasp for air. I remember gripping the wheel, trying to pull over. But before I could, everything went black. The next thing I remember is an immense feeling of stillness. It wasn't silence. It was more like a complete absence of the chaos and noise we're used to in life. I realized with astonishing clarity that I was no longer in my body. It wasn't frightening. It was liberating. There was no pain, fear, or confusion. Just an incredible peace that's almost impossible to describe. It was like stepping out of a shadow into the light. I realized I was in a different kind of space, one that felt infinite and yet intimate. Everything around me seemed to pulse with life and light, not bright or blinding but warm, like the gentle glow of 1,000 candles. The colors were unlike anything we have here on Earth, richer and deeper than words can convey. And the feeling was like being enveloped in a love so deep, so complete. It filled every part of me. As I absorbed all of this, I heard a voice. I heard a voice. It was unlike any voice I had ever heard, powerful and gentle at the same time, as if it could pierce your soul yet still comfort you. It simply said, "Anna," just my name, but the way it was spoken carried more love and understanding than I had ever known. I turned, or at least I think I turned, and there was a figure. At first I thought it was just light, but as my eyes adjusted, I saw it was an angel, not like the ones you see in storybooks or paintings. This being was magnificent, radiant, and strong, as if it bore the weight of heaven in its presence. Its eyes were like galaxies, infinite and full of knowledge. The angel looked at me and said, "Do not be afraid. The Lord has sent me to show you what is to come." And before I could respond, we were moving, not walking, not flying, just moving through what seemed like a tunnel of light. It wasn't frightening. It was exhilarating, like being carried on the wings of the wind. And then suddenly, we stopped. The first thing I saw was the earth, but not like I had seen it before. It was as if I were looking from above, but I could see much more than just the surface. There was a darkness trying to spread across the planet, thick and heavy like a storm cloud. It was unsettling, but then I noticed something else. Points of light scattered across the globe, small but radiant, like stars piercing the darkness. I asked the angel, "What are these lights?" The angel replied, "They are the prayers of God's people." They repel the darkness, even when it seems overwhelming. I felt a wave of hope, but then the angel showed me something else. I saw churches full of people, but many of them were, how can I say, asleep, not physically, but spiritually. Their lips moved in prayer, but their hearts were not engaged. It was as if they were going through the motions, distracted and distant. I felt immense sadness seeing this, but then I saw something beautiful, a spark igniting in small groups, in homes, in quiet corners of the world. People were waking up, truly seeking God, and their prayers were like flames growing ever brighter. The angel said, "A great awakening is coming, but it will be unlike anything you've ever seen before. It won't be confined to buildings or led by famous names. It will be in the hearts of those who truly seek the Lord." Then the angel showed me something that made my heart ache. I saw people who thought they were followers of Christ, but had been deceived. They knew the right words, attended the right services, but their hearts never truly surrendered. The angel's voice was firm but full of sadness as it said, "It's not enough to know about him. They must know him." Suddenly the scene changed, and I was shown a huge clock, but it wasn't like any clock I had ever seen. Instead of numbers, there were events, wars, natural disasters, technological advances. Each event was perfectly synchronized, fitting together like pieces of a divine puzzle. I realized I was seeing how everything was unfolding, according to God's plan. The angel said, "The time is short. Tell them to get ready." Then I saw something that shook me deeply. I saw a wave of deception sweeping the world. It started subtly. Small compromises, slight distortions of truth, but grew stronger, more pervasive. People who once stood firm in their faith were being led astray because they didn't recognize the lies. But amidst this, there were those who remained unshakable. They were marked, sealed with the Holy Spirit, and they bore a light that the darkness could not overcome. What the angel showed me next was both beautiful and devastating. I saw people gathering in small groups in living rooms, basements, and quiet corners of cafes. They weren't just casually reading the scriptures. They were diving deep, testing everything against God's word with an intensity I had never seen before. Their Bibles were worn, pages marked and highlighted, not for show, but out of true seeking. In one scene, I watched a young mother, exhausted from her day, staying up late, studying the scriptures with an urgency that brought tears to my eyes. She knew she needed to be anchored in the truth to guide her children through what was coming. Beside her Bible was a journal filled with prayers for her children's spiritual protection, each entry a battle report in the spiritual war for their souls. The angel then revealed something that made my heart pound. I saw how the enemy was using comfort and distraction as more effective weapons than persecution. People were being lulled to sleep by endless entertainment, social media debates, and the pursuit of comfort. Their phones had become like spiritual morphine, numbing them to the urgency of the moment. But then I saw something remarkable. Groups of believers were choosing to live differently. They weren't isolating themselves from the world, but were living with supernatural discernment. These believers had learned to recognize subtle lies that were wrapping around biblical truths. I saw how seemingly innocent phrases like "follow your heart" and "your truth" had become Trojan horses carrying deception into the church. But these awakened believers had developed spiritual antibodies through their intimacy with Jesus and dedication to His Word. They could detect these infections of false teachings immediately, not because they were smarter, but because they paid the price of seeking God's presence above all else. What impressed me most was seeing how God was raising ordinary people with extraordinary spiritual sensitivity. There was a warehouse worker who prayed over every package he handled, and I saw a real light spreading through the supply chain because of his faithfulness. A high school teacher who taught math with such genuine love that her students encountered the presence of God without her ever mentioning His name. A business executive who made decisions based on heavenly wisdom instead of profit margins. And his entire company became a center of God's activity. These people were not just surviving the deception. They were carrying revolution in their spirits. They had this remarkable ability to love deeply while standing firmly in the truth. I saw them reaching out to those who had fallen into lies, not with judgment, but with such genuine compassion that it dismantled defensive barriers. They weren't afraid of hard conversations or being labeled narrow-minded because they had found truth as a person, not just a concept. The angel showed me how their unyielding stance was creating spiritual shelters, places where others could find refuge when their own foundations began to shake. These believers learned to live in two realms at once, fully engaged in their daily responsibilities, while constantly aware of the spiritual battle around them. They weren't perfect people, but they were perfectly dependent on Jesus, and that made all the difference. The angel showed me how critical prayer is in these times. Every prayer was like a beam of light piercing the darkness, connecting with others to form a shield of protection and power. I saw how even the simplest prayers, made with pure faith, were moving mountains in the spiritual realm. I was then shown a vision of people, ordinary people like you and me, being used by God in extraordinary ways. They weren't famous preachers or evangelists. They were teachers, nurses, business owners, parents. They carried God's presence in their everyday lives, transforming their workplaces, their homes, their communities. It was a reminder that God's work is not confined to pulpits or stages. It's in the everyday acts of obedience, kindness, and faith. I could go on and on about everything I saw. The angel showed me how God was working in families, healing broken relationships, bringing prodigals home. I saw young people rising up, bold and undeterred by the world's values, deeply rooted in God's truth. I saw elderly people, often overlooked by the world, filled with renewed strength and purpose, their prayers shaking the heavens. I saw acts of love and forgiveness that became weapons against the darkness. And then the angel's final words to me were these: tell them to stay close to Jesus. Tell them the time is short. The next thing I knew, I was back in my body. I awoke in a hospital room, surrounded by beeping machines and concerned faces. The doctors told me I had been clinically dead for nearly 10 minutes. They couldn't explain my recovery. No brain damage, no lasting effects from what they said was a massive heart attack. But I knew it was because God wasn't done with me yet. Since that night, my life has changed completely. There is an urgency in my heart, not to scare people, but to awaken them to the reality of what is coming. Jesus is returning sooner than we think, and the question we all need to ask ourselves is, will we be ready? I'm sharing this because I believe it's not just my story. It's a message for all of us. Stay close to Him. Seek Him with all you have, and don't wait. The time is now.